Item number 5 is an update on Go Green Oshtemo, and this is part of the 2018 Go Green effort for West Oshtemo Hill and Genesee Prairie Cemetery Master Plan works. And Karen High will introduce this item, and then we have a consultant that will be participating in the presentation to the board through electronic means from Ann Arbor. So,
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen High. I'm the Parks Director for Oshtemo Township, and you might wonder why the Parks Director is talking about cemeteries, but historically, before many communities had parks, they used cemeteries for recreation. So we're going with that as our justification tonight. And I'm really excited to talk about this project because I think it's been the most educational project that I've worked on at the Oshtemo Township, because I didn't know a lot about cemeteries before I came. And so I want to start just by introducing the project a little bit and telling you about the collaborative effort that was involved. First of all, I want to mention that the impetus for this project was a desire to spend township funds efficiently and effectively, both now and in the future. Keeping the cemeteries mowed and trimmed year in and year out is a major investment, and we want to do that as well as we can. Many of the gravel driveways need to be repaired. There are many trees that have become overgrown to the point that they're damaging headstones, and we needed to have a long-term plan to prioritize these maintenance needs. But we also recognize that the types of burial spaces that people want are changing. There's interest now in green burials or natural burials where a person's not embalmed and put into a casket into a concrete vault. They're simply wrapped in a shroud or put in a simple box, and they're not planted. They're buried, and the native vegetation is allowed to grow over them, and those areas are not mowed. So there's a real interest in that. There's also more interest in different types of burial opportunities for cremains after cremation. So as you can see, there's a real educational process involved in this. And we wanted a plan to be able to offer some diverse types of burials, and also to make sure that we could meet the needs of future generations, because we have a limited amount of burial spaces. So as I mentioned, this has been a collaborative effort. It's gone on for much of 2018. There were a group of township residents, board members, and staff who worked closely with consultants to develop these draft master plans that you'll see tonight. The township supervisor, clerk, and treasurer were all involved, as well as the Buildings and Grounds Committee. And because of the connection that I mentioned earlier with parks and cemeteries, cemeteries were included in the Go Green Oshtemo planning process. And so a study group was formed to focus on cemeteries. There were 12 members in the study group, and they set goals and objectives, looked at our current ordinances and procedures, and discussed community needs. The general public was invited to give input on cemeteries at the Go Green Oshtemo kickoff meeting in March. And then again, there were opportunities to comment on cemeteries at public meetings in June and August. And then a lot of the work was done at an all-day design charrette that was held here in August. And we were really pleased to have 3 local funeral homes represented during that design charrette. And those were Betzler's, Langland, and Joldersma and Klein. So, but we were really fortunate to have a consultant named Jack Goodnow, who is with us remotely tonight. He's a landscape architect, and he specializes in cemetery master planning. And he has experience specifically with historic cemeteries, because that's what we have, some really interesting historic cemeteries. We also had help from a local landscape architecture firm called OCBA, specifically with Ken Paragon and Sandy Bleasner. So Jack is going to be joining us remotely in a moment to present the analysis and the draft master plans for each cemetery. But I also wanted to comment on a couple of other things. First is that, and a really interesting part of this process was that each of our cemeteries had areas where there were no visible signs of burials. There were no headstones. But we didn't have any burial records for those particular areas. So early in the process, we hired a company to do ground-penetrating radar research. And we were thinking that those might be areas that we could plot and sell for future burial space. But we learned that those areas were no longer available for future burials. They were pretty densely populated, yeah. And we learned, because of that, that some of them were pioneer cemeteries. And maybe they had wood headstones at some point, but there are no longer any markers. So you'll see some of those maps that were prepared from the ground-penetrating radar research in a few moments. And I just want to close by saying that this presentation is on the township website, the PowerPoint presentation that you'll see, and it's posted on the notice board section. We would love to have comments. Those can be emailed to us at the email address that's on the website, or you can call or come into the township office and ask for any of us. We would like to receive comments by January 22nd, if possible. And when we get to the master plans, that'll be shown on the screen. The words are a little hard to read, and so we do have paper copies in the back if anyone is interested and would like to take a look at those. So Jack, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Very good. I'm listening to a little bit of feedback, so you'll have to excuse me. Is there any way, Rick, to diminish the feedback?
Stand by.
That's much better. It's my pleasure to be coming to you via technology this evening from a distance. Thank you very much for having me, and it's been a pleasure to be on the team. It was definitely a team effort, and I was able to participate with some of the things that are going on in the cemetery industry today. And as Karen pointed out, there are big changes going on in the industry in terms of what people are choosing. Excuse me. And it's also very important that this township has a real luxury of having three very important historic sites that can become part of the greenway system as pausing spaces, recreation spaces, and just meditation places within the township serve a very important function for linking to the past as well as enjoying nature. The trends, as Karen pointed out, that are really dramatically affecting the industry and have to be taken into account are the trend towards cremation and the trend towards green burial. And they each have their own opportunities associated with them. The real benefit of cremation to the cemetery and to the township is that it provides an important service without consuming large amounts of land. So with limited space in your cemeteries, it does become very important to accommodate the growing desire for cremation. It's also important because the parks are truly open space, that they do include, in one form or another, some amount of green burial so that there is always a natural element within the cemetery. And the Genesee Cemetery in particular has areas that are believed to be native prairie. So these become very important resources. So our job was to look at the details of each of the cemetery and to understand how we could use what the resources are to meet these growing needs for what the cemetery industry likes to think of as choices for burial. That includes a standard full-body burial with a flat marker, full-body burial with an upright marker, estates where a family can be together in one area, cremation that can be below ground, referred to as interment of cremains. It can be above ground in a columbarium, which is a wall with niches for cremains. It can include something that's akin to scattering. And then, of course, the green burial option. So our task was to find out what land was usable within these cemeteries and how we could best plan the future for this growing trend. And in the process, generate revenue that could be feed back into the cemeteries for maintenance of the arboriculture, the grounds, the monuments, and in fact, generate new plantings, which are needed because cemeteries, because they're forever, it's important to have a continual regeneration of the trees over time, and that's often forgotten. They die and they get cut down and they don't get replaced. So this is an attempt to not only satisfy the burial needs, but to enrich and ensure the future life of these as good landscape spaces within the community. So with that being said, we had to look at the opportunities. Genesee Prairie Cemetery has a combination of burial areas that you see in the photos that appear in many cases to not have burial. Some of those areas are in fact open, some are unmarked graves. So as Karen pointed out, it's important to understand what goes along on below grade in these existing areas. The lower photograph is the south end of the property, which is a native area left natural and in some cases growing native prairie plants that offers the opportunity for a green burial to create burial situations in an environment that wouldn't change dramatically from the way you see it now, except that it would be managed and maintained in a softer way. So the first step was to understand what is below grade. On the left is the ground penetrating radar map that shows the yellow are areas that are known to be have graves because of the plot maps that existed within the township, and the blue indicates areas where ground penetrating radar identified burials in areas that were in question. This information was used, and you can see on the plan on the left again, the area of the predominantly red zones are areas that we know have burials either through monumentation or ground penetrating radar. So there were limited areas in the north portion of this site for new burial, but there are roads. There are more roads in this cemetery than are needed functionally. So one of the opportunities was to, in fact, close roads and use them for burial. So that was part of the effort, was to determine how we could maintain good funeral procession circulation and still take out some of the roads. This northernmost end is a pioneer burial area with no markings, but an opportunity to reflect some of the history. So we thought that it would be important to have something go on in this area that does speak to the pioneers who in fact settled this area. On the east side of the entire property is the National Guard Armory. And we looked at that from the standpoint that because there's not a road that parallels, not a usable road going down this east side, how could we possibly joint venture or utilize the parking and access of the armory? So at a very preliminary level, we wanted to see where we might enter the cemetery if you did in fact park funeral gatherings off the site, as opposed to having to put them on the South 17th if they're a large cortege or funeral procession. At this point, it was the division between the existing burial and the open prairie ground. So this is all open to our needs as we determined, and you can see on the photograph, this is a good sized area for natural burial, and particularly with cremation, there are lots of spaces to knit and tuck new burial in on the roads, road closures, or even along this open edge on the east property. The strategies then were to come up with something that would be physically part of a trail system for the Go Green Oshtemo trail system that would allow you to get by foot or bicycle into the property with a memorial that would explain the history of the area and the history of the cemetery in a very public outreaching sort of face to the main road that faces the north at the north end of the property. And then these roads that could be still maintained with a couple small places that would allow us to bring cars into, and then use another open space to put what's referred to as a columbarium, or a small seating area that has walls with cremation in the walls. So we have the opportunity to capture a fair amount of new burial opportunities within a very small space in places like this. We wanted to suggest that there would be gateways coming from the armory for people entering on foot into the pathways that are in the cemetery. And at the north end, there's a similar opportunity at the south end, a similar opportunity as there is at the north to put a walkway and an unburied strip with a cremation meditation node within there. Along the property, as we get to this end of the site, there's room to put in cremation walls and little meditation areas all along the property. So with these three opportunities, there's a fair amount of ability to absorb a lot of cremation burial without really changing what you see in the cemetery, except for improving it, which includes the addition of trees. If you were to go out there, you'd notice that this section in particular is lacking trees. So new trees as well as infill trees on the old portion is part of the strategy. This would be the main entrance from 11th that would have parking spaces to accommodate this busier end of the cemetery, as well as accommodating the green burial area. And in this case, we would restore this to a prairie grass and have both full body and cremation burial in a more organic or natural setting, and it would include a committal shelter so you could hold outdoor services within the prairie setting. And that is dense enough that would be useful for a number of years, and then phase 2 would extend it one step further, phase 3 would extend it again. So there's a lot of opportunity to both add cremation, full body burial, and green burial in this cemetery, while referring to the history of the site and upgrading the landscape as part of the revenue generated from these new opportunities. I'm sorry, I should have shown you the detail. This is our cremation area with a parking pull-off at the north end. This would be the bicycle loop into the site, and then our gateways to the armory. Similarly, on the south end, a little bit more detail showing the burial area would be serviced by a small parking area, because with the cremation walls that are here and the cremation here and the green burial, this is going to become, for the next few decades, the active end of the cemetery. So we still have a loop road to get a cortege in, while we close other roads and offer some visitor parking in this zone. Hill Cemetery is another gorgeous, historic, rural cemetery in the tradition of the American rural cemeteries, where the topography is left in place. The natural landscape, again, is rich but needs to be enhanced. The existing conditions here are that this end of the north end of the cemetery is laid out, some of which is buried and some of which isn't. I'll show in the next photograph. But the question here became what goes on in the south end, and this is what the ground penetrating radar revealed, is that there's a substantial amount of burial, including ones that are not in rigorous rows, because historically things would tend to move around a bit. But the good news is there are little pockets of open space, like here, 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 and we can make use of those with cremation because they only require a very small footprint to get a lot of meaningful burial. So this is the south end where the existing burial is determined by ground penetrating radar, and this is our more visible area on the north. And you can see from the blow up here that within that north area, there is still a fair amount of available ground. The green areas are areas that are not currently buried. So it gives us the ability to still offer a fair amount of traditional full-body in-ground burial in the historic tradition of an upright or flat marker. We want to improve the north end with additional trees, and there's and gateways which mark the entrance. The fences that are around the property are quite nice, but it would be nice to add to that by having gateways that are of similar style and character. One of the thoughts here is that within this full-body burial area, we could put a cremation wall because the grade descends here a bit, so we could cut a little bit of a sunken garden into this corner so that it has privacy from the roads, but offers a wall of cremation in a way that faces the rest of the cemetery. So you could sit in here and look at the cemetery, and the family that the parents may want full-body burial and the children may want cremation, it gives the opportunity to have those two in adjacency to each other. At the south end of the property, we're taking an entirely different approach and using a natural meadow as the theme, where we can't put in new full-body burial, but we do have the opportunity to take these little open spaces and link them with a trail system and have pausing areas that would have small cremation and historic monuments. So the beauty of this would be you would be walking into a wildflower meadow with the reference of the historic monumentation, but then new burial all along the pathways and at the columbarium courts, meditation courts. So it is a very nice combination of a traditional burial with a very new manifestation of green and cremation in one cemetery without losing the historic look of the cemetery. West Oshtemo is also a lovely historic cemetery adjacent to the church, which gives it a very historic sense. Although it's not part of the township, it's part of the landscape of the cemetery. So it was important to understand through ground penetrating radar what we could do in this area. And again, we have a couple open spots where we can insert some high density burial. In this part of the cemetery, it's open at the north end, and this road could potentially be closed so that we have a loop road coming in here and back out here. And we don't need this road in today's world, so this is another area that could become closed and infilled with full-body burial. So the strategy here is to find these open spaces, make a loop using this road now and this road in a way that would allow us to use the open space north end to make a small columbarium community, if you will, with cremation walls to back the property and cap off the end of the cemetery against the existing residential to create separation and privacy. There's room for a committal shelter, a place for outdoor services, and then this road, which no longer needs to carry vehicular traffic, can become a pathway with new cremation meditation spaces along that pathway. And then the existing road gets closed and reused for just infill to look like the rest of the historic cemetery with upright monuments. And then the far northwest corner is the opportunity again to let the landscape go to a native meadow and then use these little pockets of open space to drop in a cremation garden and a meditation garden within the prairie and to have trail systems throughout here where you could bury in the open spaces next to the trail in-ground cremation in a prairie setting all along the trail. The closure of KL Avenue, West KL Avenue, gives us the opportunity to use this as part of our funeral procession loop, and then to bridge that with another pedestrian area with a columbarium court at the end. And this whole triangle of land is open for the future. And at this point, it won't be used for quite some time until decades from now, when the need presents itself, a new plan can be generated for how much of this is full body burial and how much is cremation. It's possible that at the time this is developed, it will be 80 to 90 to 100% cremation. Probably never 100%, but like the northwest of the United States and California, they're experiencing cremation rates of 80 and 90% now. The rest of the country will follow over time. In the process, we can define a church parking lot as part of the property. And so that, again, we get a combination of traditional burial, infill, high-density cremation, and then a natural green area. So all three cemeteries, this is, a blow-up of that area showing the cremation court and meditation courts and the committal shelter. And south, the detail of using the closed KL Avenue to make this one cemetery all the way out to the existing Almena Road, a drive. So those are the three cemeteries, all with great opportunities given cremation for a lot of life left in the cemeteries and a lot of ability to generate revenue as well as provide a service so that they can continue as both cemeteries and important open spaces in the community. I might just mention briefly that the township has gone to the next level of setting priorities for taking action in all three of those. And this is very preliminary, and it's not important to go through the details now, but it is beginning to look at strategies for ensuring that all three cemeteries have both a master plan and a way of getting at it incrementally over time, so that because the cemeteries grow very, very slowly, but as each phase generates revenue, it makes opportunities to do the next phase. So I don't know, Libby, Karen, if it's possible to have questions, but that's the conclusion of my portion.
Thank you, Jack. First, I'll ask if there are any questions that the board members have at this time. Again, this is intended to present the draft master plans and then to take feedback from board members and the public for the next month. And then based on that feedback, there could be amendments to the plans, but sometime in 2019, perhaps February, these plans could come back to the board for adoption. I guess at this point, I could open it up for public comment on the plans at this time. If there's anybody that would like to comment.
Is that mic on still?
Hi there. I'll be glad to do this via the internet, however we need to do it, but some of the questions I come up with and comments that I have is for how accurate is the ground penetrating radar, because it's showing rectangles, which means you're relying on a box of some sort. And I grew up by a cemetery, and my dad used to dig in that cemetery, and he stopped because you couldn't trust what was showing as markers because there was a lot of loose bodies laying around. So my question and concern is the ground penetrating really has shown a lot of good things, but is it really open area that's being discussed, or are you going to run into bodies that have been put to the side? Because another big tradition was to reuse a coffin because of cost, and you literally bury them, dig it up, put the body side, put the body in, have a service, put them in the ground again. And that was traditionally used a lot, especially in our area because of cost savings. And then the shelters, I mean, these sound beautiful, but at the same time, the concern that's been happening in our area for homeless, for vandalism, we're talking about putting in some open-air shelters. We're encouraging people to use the cemeteries, which I grew up playing in one. I think that's a great idea. At the same time, you're opening up a lot of vandalism in a cemetery, graffiti, trash, etc. You would like to think that people are going to go and actually use them for what they're supposed to be, but I just want to make sure that these concerns are being addressed and looked at, because I do cemetery tours, and I know what the cemeteries look like and how much damage is done. The planting of trees, the other question I have on that was, my understanding is you cannot repair tombs or gravestones, markers. Those are private property, belong to the family because they belong to that person who's in the ground. And so you can't really repair that type of thing or do any, you can't even straighten it up if it's falling over because of roots, et cetera.
You're allowed to do that, that's fine.
So, but those are my concerns.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'll defer first to you, to the township, to answer. Some of those are more legal and procedural questions. But go ahead, I have a couple thoughts.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I defer in some sense to the ground penetrating radar because the question, because you know from talking with the contractors the level of accuracy. But I would simply add that because this is going to develop in phases, the process would be to take phase one and take the areas in question of phase one and actually do probing. So the ground penetrating radar would be the first step, and then you would have to confirm the availability through more detailed means. But you don't have to do that for the whole cemetery. That would be an overwhelming task. But you can do it on a phase-by-phase basis so that you could be ensured that the development is not going where there is a grave. Or you have the opportunity, as many cemeteries do, if need be, you can reinter as needed. So those two options are open. I don't think any work can be done without careful look, and two, you do have some flexibility to work with the space. Regarding the shelters, I think it's a little bit of a catch-22 because you have to have the shelters for it to function as either a park space or a cemetery space in a complete sense. And I think it's part of the risk and reward that's built into this. It does become an attractive nuisance. However, you don't want that to stop the ability to offer that amenity any more than you don't want to put shelters in parks. There's a cemetery, many cemeteries I've worked with, one in particular that was a municipal cemetery, was facing the same issue, and they chose to actually take a very bold move and open it to the public for dog walking and bicycling and just about anything that people wanted to do within reason, as long as it was quiet and respectful. And the outcome of that, interestingly enough, was better security because they become eyes on the property. If you let runners and walkers and picnickers come into this, it's a deterrent. It really is. And they have examples of people returning lost items. They have examples of people, helping others that are in need because they've been in the cemetery. So overall, I believe it becomes very important to treat it like a park and to open it like a park and make it accessible and provide the facilities, and then simply make sure that it's managed properly. I don't think vandalism's any reason to not provide the necessary service. And then on the graves, you have to be careful, but the cemetery, in my experience, has every right to shore up a grave, to reset a monument. They reset monuments all the time. And if a tree is growing in a grave, it's probably old enough that the people who visit are long gone, and it's for the best of the cemetery to remove the tree that's a risk and to straighten up the monument. So that level of maintenance is a very important thing to do, and what you want to do is be sure that you plant another tree when you do that, so that the net loss is, you never get a net loss to the tree count.
Any other questions or comments?
I would comment to the ground penetrating radar.
Sure.
There was a concern regarding the ground penetrating radar and the accuracy. It is very accurate, but I will point out that we actually, our GIS staff member actually put the box there. That's not the shape or size of what was discovered in the ground penetrating radar. We chose to do that to sort of guess at the space being taken up with lots of room estimated around it. So very likely what you see on that map is not even the amount of space that's taken up by that one ping from the ground penetrating radar. But rather it has lots of cushion around it, and and we sort of, I guess, that simulated what the size of a vault or a coffin might be.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The ground penetrating radar gave a center point, and then our GIS person put a 4x10 shape. So they're probably conservative in terms of the space that's used up. Any other comments, or Karen, anything in closing, or Jack in closing? I think it was a good presentation, and there's another public comment, if you could.
Well, from my point of view, thanks for the opportunity, and I think you have three very good resources for the community that can be enhanced, very useful over time. So
Okay, just hold on.
this is an excellent effort.
Hold on one moment, Jack. We have one more public comment.
Yes, to identify myself or no need?
It's up to you. Yeah.
Okay. I found this presentation absolutely fascinating, and I'm not here because of this presentation, but I'm glad I was here. And Jack, whoever you are, wherever you are, I want to commend you, because I wonder where they found you, because you are just amazing. And I've been texting friends and details about all that I'm learning about this whole industry, and I'm gonna come visit your cemeteries. I mean, seriously, I like it, and I'm thinking, my boyfriend and I, who are thinking about being buried up north, I'm thinking now maybe we'll be buried here in Oshtemo. So you might even have got yourself some more, some company, some business. So Jack, good going, and thank you, Jack. I'm really impressed.
That's good to hear. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
It's been a pleasure. It's great team to work with.
Thank you. What a great closing. Anything else?
Very good. Well, I will close out if that's appropriate,
Yes.
and say good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Good night.
Good night. Happy holidays.
Yeah, you too. Have a good holiday. Bye-bye.